a beacon in the dark. In a time when the people of Judah had forgotten the God who led their ancestors out of Egypt, there rose a young king who was destined to change the course of history. His name was Josiah. When he took the throne, Judah was immersed in idolatry and moral decay. Yet Josiah wasn't just another king. He was a beacon of light in a time of darkness, leading a spiritual revival that turned the nation back to God. Josiah's reign is a story of faith, reform, and courage. His commitment to restoring the true worship of God in Judah not only left a lasting impact on his people, but also showed what it means to be a leader in times of moral collapse. This is the story of a boy who became king at 8 years old and, despite the odds, led one of the most remarkable transformations in Judah's history. Josiah ascended the throne of Judah at the tender age of 8, 2 Kings 22:1. His father, King Amon, had been assassinated after a short and corrupt reign, leaving the kingdom in turmoil. Josiah's grandfather, Manasseh, had also led Judah astray, encouraging the worship of Baal and other pagan gods. Given his lineage, it would have been easy for Josiah to continue in the footsteps of his predecessors. But Josiah was different. Even at a young age, he chose a different path. The Bible tells us he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. 2 Kings 22:2. His mother, Jedidah, likely played a significant role in shaping his early values, along with faithful priests and advisors who had remained true to God's law despite the nation's widespread apostasy. Together, they helped guide Josiah through the chaotic early years of his reign, nurturing in him a deep love for God and a desire for righteous leadership. From the beginning, Josiah stood out for his heart for God. Unlike his father and grandfather, who plunged the nation into idolatry, Josiah sought to honor the God of his ancestor, King David. His youthful energy and commitment to righteousness foreshadowed the great changes he would bring to Judah. At the age of 16, in the 8th year of his reign, something remarkable happened. Josiah began to seek the Lord earnestly. 2 Chronicles 34:3. In a world filled with pagan worship and corrupt practices, Josiah's search for God was a breath of fresh air. He wasn't just concerned with being a good king. He wanted to lead Judah in a way that aligned with God's will. During this time, Josiah likely spent hours in prayer, learning about the rich history of his people and their covenant with God. He would have heard stories of how God delivered Israel from Egypt, led them through the wilderness, and established them in the Promised Land. These stories must have stirred something deep within Josiah. He realized how far Judah had drifted from the truth, and he felt a growing responsibility to lead his people back to God. What made Josiah's spiritual journey even more extraordinary was that it came at a time when the nation was in moral chaos. He was a young man growing up in an environment saturated with idolatry and rebellion against God, yet he chose to seek the truth and follow the path of righteousness. His heart was fully committed to God, a quality that would define his reign. By the age of 20, Josiah was ready to act on his faith. In the 12th year of his reign, he launched an aggressive campaign to rid Judah of its idols and pagan altars. 2 Chronicles 34:3-7. This was no small task. The people of Judah had embraced idol worship for generations, setting up altars to Baal and other gods in high places across the land. The worship of these false gods had become so deeply ingrained in their culture that tearing them down would require immense determination and courage. But Josiah was undeterred. He traveled throughout Judah, overseeing the destruction of every idol, altar, and shrine dedicated to false gods. The high places were torn down, the altars were smashed, and the Asherah poles were burned. He even went beyond Judah's borders, extending his reforms into the northern territories of Israel, which had long since fallen to the Assyrians. Josiah's actions sent a powerful message. Judah would no longer serve false gods. His reforms were not just about cleaning up the land, they were about cleansing the hearts of the people. He knew that true worship of God required more than just outward changes. It required a complete rejection of the idolatrous practices that had polluted the nation for so long. In the 18th year of Josiah's reign, at age 26, a life-altering event took place. By this time, Josiah had already made significant strides in reforming Judah, but something was still missing. The temple in Jerusalem, once the center of worship, was in disrepair. Determined to restore the temple, Josiah ordered its repair. It was during these repairs that the high priest Hilkiah made an extraordinary discovery. The Book of the Law, 2 Kings 22:8. This discovery was monumental. The book of the law, most likely a portion of the Torah, had been forgotten for years, buried under the weight of Judah's neglect and idolatry. When Shaphan the scribe read the contents of the book to Josiah, the king was overcome with grief. He tore his clothes in mourning, realizing just how far Judah had strayed from God's commandments. 2 Kings 22:11. The book of the law laid out God's covenant with his people, including the blessings for obedience and the curses for disobedience. Josiah understood immediately that Judah was on a path toward destruction unless they repented and returned to the Lord. The king's heart was deeply moved, and he sought guidance from the prophetess Huldah. Hulda's message was both sobering and hopeful. God's judgment would indeed come upon Judah because of their sins, but because of Josiah's humility and repentance, the disaster would not occur during his lifetime. 2 Kings 22:19-20. This was a moment of grace for Josiah and his people. Renewing the covenant with God, Josiah didn't waste any time. Armed with the knowledge from the book of the law, he gathered all the people of Judah, from the highest officials to the common citizens, and read the entire book to them. 2 Kings 23:2. This was a powerful and public declaration of Judah's need to return to God. Josiah wasn't just interested in personal repentance. He wanted the entire nation to recommit to their covenant with the Lord. In an extraordinary moment of leadership, Josiah stood before the people and led them in renewing their covenant with God. The people pledged to follow the Lord and obey his commandments with all their hearts and souls. 2 Kings 23:3. This public commitment was a turning point for the nation. Under Josiah's guidance, Judah had taken the first steps toward spiritual renewal. Josiah's reforms were more than just religious decrees. They were a call to the people to return to their roots. He wanted them to remember who they were, God's chosen people, set apart for his purposes. By renewing the covenant, Josiah was restoring the nation's identity and laying the foundation for a future built on faithfulness to God. One of the most significant reforms Josiah instituted was the restoration of the Passover celebration. This was not just a routine observance. It was a national event of epic proportions. The Passover, which commemorated God's deliverance of Israel from slavery in Egypt, had been neglected for generations. But Josiah, determined to honor God's commandments, reinstituted the festival with a level of grandeur and reverence that had not been seen in centuries. The Bible tells us that no Passover like it had been celebrated since the days of the judges. 2 Kings 23:22. Josiah provided thousands of lambs and goats for the people to sacrifice, ensuring that even the poorest among them could participate in the celebration. 2 Chronicles 35:7. The entire nation came together to remember God's faithfulness and to renew their commitment to him. This Passover was more than just a religious ritual. It was a symbol of the spiritual revival that was taking place under Josiah's leadership. The people were not just going through the motions, they were genuinely returning to God. The Passover reminded them of their history, their identity as God's people, and their responsibility to live according to his commandments. Josiah's tragic death. Despite Josiah's faithful efforts to reform Judah, his life ended in tragedy. In 609 BC, when Josiah was 39 years old, he made the fateful decision to go into battle against Pharaoh Necho of Egypt. Necho was passing through Judah on his way to assist the Assyrians in their fight against Babylon, and Josiah sought to stop him. Despite warnings from Necho that God had commanded him to continue on his mission, and that Josiah should not interfere, the king chose to engage in battle. The result was disastrous. Josiah was fatally wounded by archers at the Battle of Megiddo, and his body was brought back to Jerusalem, where he died. 2 Kings 23:29. The nation mourned deeply for their beloved king. The prophet Jeremiah even composed laments for Josiah. 2 Chronicles 35:25, a testament to the deep sorrow felt across the land. Josiah's death marked the end of an era. His reign had been a brief but shining moment of righteousness in Judah's history, and with his passing, the nation quickly descended back into idolatry and rebellion. Josiah's legacy. Though Josiah's life was cut short, his legacy endured. The Bible records that neither before nor after, Josiah was there, a king like him, who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength. 2 Kings 23:25. Josiah's commitment to reforming Judah, his humility before God, and his zeal for the Lord left a lasting impression on the nation. Josiah's reforms delayed God's judgment on Judah for a time. Though the nation would eventually fall to the Babylonians and go into exile, Josiah's efforts to lead the people back to God had a significant impact. His story is a reminder that even in the darkest times, one person's faithfulness can make a profound difference. Josiah's story is one of faith, courage, and unwavering devotion to God. In a time of moral and spiritual decay, Josiah stood firm in his commitment to lead Judah back to the truth. His life is a testament to the power of one person's faith to inspire a nation, and his reforms continue to be a source of inspiration for generations of believers. Though the world around him was lost in idolatry, Josiah sought the Lord with all his heart. His legacy is a reminder that even in the darkest times, we can turn back to God, and through faithfulness, spark a revival that will outlast our own lifetime.